The Tiger II, also dubbed as the King Tiger by the Allies, was undoubtedly one of the most spine-chilling, feared tanks of the Second World War. A successor to the Tiger I, the Tiger II combined the Tiger I's thick armor with the sloping used on the Panther medium tank. Weighing at 70 tons, the Tiger II was protected by 100 to 185 millimeters of armor to the front. Armed with a long-barreled 88mm anti-tank cannon, the King Tiger was devastating compared to the American M4 Sherman used in 1942, which was equipped with a much smaller 40 caliber gun. The Tiger I seemed to have it all: firepower, armor, and for an early 1940s vehicle that weighed as much as today's M1 Abrams, it was fairly agile. The Tiger I even looked deadly, but Hitler and his generals were not satisfied. They complained that the Tiger's KWK-36 gun was not the most powerful version of the 88mm cannon, and so, even before the Tiger I debuted on the battlefield near Leningrad in September of 1942, work had begun on a successor. The King Tiger long-barreled high-velocity cannon could penetrate 5 inches of armor at a range of 2 kilometers, or 1.2 miles. With Sherman and T-34 crews having about 2 inches of frontal armor between them, it's no wonder that a supersized Tiger must have felt like death staring you right in the face. Taking a look at the King Tiger's combat history, it was issued to heavy tank battalions of the Army and the Waffen-SS. It was first used in combat by the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion during the Allied invasion of Normandy on July 11, 1944. While 2 King Tigers were lost in the Canadian offensive of Operation Atlantic, the Germans inflicted heavy casualties to the opposing Canadians, injuring 1,965 men, 441 of which were fatal. On the Eastern Front, it was first used on August 12, 1944, by the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion, resisting the Lvov-Sandomiersk offensive. It attacked the Soviet bridgehead over the Vistula River near Baranov-Sandomiersky. On the road to Ogledal, 3 Tiger IIs were destroyed in an ambush by a few T-34-85s. Because these German tanks suffered ammunition explosions, which caused many crew fatalities, main gun rounds were no longer allowed to be stowed within the turret, reducing capacity to 68 and heavily complicating the reloading process. Up to 14 Tiger IIs of the 501st were destroyed or captured in the area between August 11th and 14th. To ambushes and flank attacks by both Soviet T-34-85 and IS-2 tanks and ISU-122 assault guns in inconvenient sandy terrain. On October 15, 1944, Tiger IIs of the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion played a crucial role during Operation Panzerfaust, supporting Otto Skorzeny troops in taking the Hungarian capital of Budapest, which ensured that the country remained with the Axis until the end of the war. The 503rd then took part in the Battle of Debrecen. The 503rd remained in the Hungarian theater of operations for 166 days, during which time it accounted for at least 121 Soviet tanks, 244 anti-tank guns and artillery pieces, 5 aircraft, and a train. This was set against the loss of 25 King Tigers. 10 were knocked out by Soviet troops and burned out, 2 were sent back to Vienna for a factory overhaul, while 13 were blown up by their crews for various reasons, usually to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. The King Tiger was distributed into 4 heavy panzer battalions and used in great numbers during the Ardennes offensive, also known as the Battle of the Bulge, of December 1944. At least 150 King Tigers were present, nearly a third of total production. Most were lost over the course of the offensive. The 103rd SS Heavy Panzer Battalion claimed approximately 500 kills in the period from January to April 1945 on the Eastern Front for the loss of 45 Tiger IIs, most of which were abandoned and destroyed by their own crews after mechanical breakdowns or for lack of fuel. But was the Tiger II really that devastating, or was it mostly just Nazi propaganda? According to our research, the Tiger II featured numerous improvements over the Tiger I. The original Tiger had vertical armor rather than the more effective sloped armor, effectively increasing armor thickness, found on the T-34 and the later German Panther. The heavy armor and powerful long-range gun gave the Tiger II an advantage against all opposing Western Allied and Soviet tanks attempting to engage it from head-on. This was especially true on the Western Front, where until the arrival of a few M25 Pershings in 1945 and the few M4A3E2 Sherman jumbo assault tanks with additional armor, the King Tiger had well-sloped armor that was 6 inches thick on the front hull. Its turret could traverse 360 degrees in 19 seconds, compared to 60 seconds for the Tiger I, which had theoretically allowed a fast-moving Sherman or T-34 to maneuver behind a Tiger I faster than a German tank's gun could track it. The Tiger II was also more agile than it looked. It had a road speed of about 25 miles per hour, versus about 30 for the Sherman and T-34. Cross-country speed was about 10 miles per hour, versus the 20 miles per hour for the other two tanks. Author Thomas Jentz, an expert among Tiger historians, writes that despite its size, the Tiger II had surprisingly good tactical mobility. Unlike the megalomaniacal 200-ton German Maus, which couldn't even roll over many European bridges, the King Tiger was a viable design. But the Tiger II wasn't without its own set of problems. Late-war German tanks like the Tiger and Panther had a reputation for being over-engineered and mechanically finicky. As with any sophisticated weapon, the Tiger II did suffer from reliability issues, especially at the hands of the poorly trained and inexperienced tank drivers of the late-war German army. But given a skilled crew and proper logistics support, the Tiger II was fairly reliable. The problem was that by the time the King Tiger made its combat debut in Normandy in July 1944, the necessities that Nazi Germany most lacked were trained, experienced tank crews and logistics support. To add to the problem, the Tiger II consumed lots of fuel, which was in short supply for the Germans. Which brings us back to our question, was the King Tiger as great as they say? The answer is, it depends. In terms of metrics on paper, firepower, armor, and mobility, the Tiger II was quite impressive. It was probably better than its American rival, the lighter and less heavily armored 46-ton American M26 Pershing. A more interesting question is the King Tiger versus the Soviet IS-2 tank. There were all sorts of conflicting data and opinions on this duel, though an encounter between IS-2s and King Tigers in August 1944 destroyed or damaged 10 tanks on either side. One flaw of the IS-2, whose powerful 122mm gun could theoretically penetrate a King Tiger's thickly armored turret at 1 mile range, was its low rate of fire and limited onboard ammunition supply. Had the war continued until 1946, the King Tiger would probably have met its match in the British Centurion, one of the most successful tanks in history and still used today. However, the most telling statistic is that while the Soviet Union produced nearly 3,900 IS-2s, Germany built just 492 King Tigers. The Soviets built more than 108,000 tanks, and the Americans 80,000, because World War II was a contest of production that devoured material at an appalling rate. Ironically, the King Tiger's most deadly predator wasn't other tanks, but Royal Air Force Lancaster bombers. The German army ordered 1,500 King Tigers, but RAF raids on manufacturer Herschel's factories slashed production. 5 raids between September 22nd and October 7th, 1944 destroyed 95% of floor area at the Henschel plant. It is estimated that this caused the loss in production of 657 Tiger IIs. Full production ran from mid-1944 to the end of the war. Only 492 units were produced. 1 in 1943, 379 in 1944, and 112 in 1945. Less than 500 King Tigers, no matter how powerful, were not going to change the outcome. An earlier Tiger I cost 250,000 Reichsmark, 2 to 3 times as much as smaller German tanks such as the Panther or Mark IV. In comparison, the Tiger II cost 321,500 Reichsmark, the costliest German tank to produce at the time. Would Germany have been better off with a greater number of lighter tanks, especially the heavier Panther? This is a question that still lingers among historians and war enthusiasts. At the end, any weapon can be extremely situational. A tank that functions well in one setting might prove a failure in another. By the time the Tiger II made its combat debut in Normandy in July 1944, Germany was on the defensive. Big tanks like the King Tiger were mobile fortresses if properly sighted in ambush positions. But on the attack, advancing down narrow, icy roads as the Tiger II did in the Battle of the Bulge, big, heavy, fuel-guzzling tanks could be a liability. One problem with the Tiger 1 and 2 was that they were so big relative to other German tanks that the only vehicle that could tow a damaged Tiger was another Tiger. As the German armies retreated in the east and west, many of these behemoths were abandoned or blown up by their own crews. Luckily for the Allies, the King Tiger came too late in the war and in too few numbers. Otherwise, it could have inflicted more devastating casualties for the American and Russian crews. Heavy tanks like the King Tiger proved a dead end. After 1945, nations switched to building main battle tanks that had sufficient firepower and armor to breach enemy defenses, like heavy tanks, while being mobile enough to exploit breakthroughs like medium and light tanks. And just like that, the day of the King Tiger had passed before it ever really came. Thanks for watching. Please share and subscribe to my channel.